I feel like I'm being excluded from the fun.
I think
But you think I'm what?
I think you're fine.
You think I'm fine? I don't know. I don't know.
Fine.
Am
I
I
was gonna
fine?
say, your
I think we could
ability,
have a poll on it.
I'm sure we can.
Ted, are we going to get to see your face today? Are you?
Yeah, yeah, hold on. Well, it's because I haven't done my nasal irrigation. So
Well,
hold on.
that's
I'll be right.
yeah. We want to make sure you have your nasal irrigation done.
Nasal irrigation. Okay, I'll set up my,
What is nasal irrigation?
I have an idea.
I have this thing where it shoots water in one nostril and it goes around my sinuses and comes out the other nostril. And there's all kinds of nonsense that comes out with that.
See, teachers, if you want to get the attention of your class, I think this is a good whole class
Yeah, just
motivator.
Yeah, do nasal irrigation.
Nothing entertains a group of elementary school students more than watching something go up one nostril and come out the other. That is probably the epitome of entertaining. So
And then you can compare. It's science. You can measure it. It's math. You can write a poem about it or a haiku. It's language arts. There's so much involved. And then you can dip your brush in it and use it for watercolors. It's also art.
That's juicy.
always good to. Speaking of art, augmentative communication. Yes. So
Yes.
we did a lot of talking on Tuesday. I went back and I listened to some of it. There's some good stuff in that conversation. So I guess where we need to pick up now is, since we kind of busted it all apart, like where to build it back up at, you know. So what are some of the best practices, would be my question to the two of you, for implementing augmentative communication?
I think before we implement it, we need to look at how we are assessing to give the child augmentative communication.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lauren. Keep talking. Okay. Keep talking.
So I think if we just hand a child a device and expect the child to know it and be able to be fluent in it, we're giving ourselves a disservice. So I think as a speech therapist, look as a IEP team and just a teacher, we all need to look at what the child's ability level is and do a dynamic assessment to figure out what the best device is, because there's so many on the market.
Yeah, a dynamic assessment, not a regular one.
Not a regular one.
Well, so you need to assess correctly and choose the right device or the right system for the learner. And again, from behavior analytics standpoint, if the kid can echo, I'm going to go with speech. If the kid can't echo, but has some vocal production and good fine motor imitation, I'm going to go with sign while I'm working on speech. If the kid doesn't do either of those very well while I work on those, I'm going to go with some other system. Like, what were you calling it, Lauren? The picture board thingies? What is that?
Oh, a dynamic device?
Oh, static device.
Static device, yeah.
Yes.
Or
we're using dynamic a lot. It's more.
Yeah. But then later on, you know, as things get more sophisticated, you got to move to dynamic as quickly as you can if you're not getting speech or sign. Also, so that's the assessment aspect of it. But it may be that you not only need to teach how to use the device, but you also have to teach verbal behavior to begin with. You know, because if the child's current verbal repertoire consists of aggression and self-injury and whining and crying to get what he wants, well, that's not real conventional, right? So this is an excellent resource for that. Sundberg and Partington, teaching language to children with autism or other developmental disabilities. And it has a bunch of handy charts in it, like this one, that walks you through step by step how to teach verbal behavior with the kids. And while this is geared primarily toward teaching speech or teaching sign, with some adjustment, you can also use it for teaching PECs, for teaching the static device, how to use the static device to mand, or to teach lots of other things. But Lauren, you're right. It's not just simply handing the device over, handing the static thing over. You have to teach the person how to use it. And that requires knowing how to teach and understanding verbal behavior.
Yeah, and I also think oftentimes I've actually sat with a speech therapist, and she has told me that she didn't have the time to teach the child the device, and that's why the child didn't get a device. And it's just so many alarms are going off in my head, because once, like, speech therapists, we have an ethical code, like BCBAs, we have an ethical code, and it's like that should never be the hindrance.
Yeah. So we had an interesting question. Ted, I can't remember if you jumped off before we got this question. We were doing our webinar for Bulgarian parents yesterday. And a question that got asked was, and I'm fairly certain it was a speech pathologist asking me the question, if the child has an established expanded language with PECs, but is also making sounds, even though they're not completely what we'd want articulation wise, like they can do a lot more with the PECs than they can with the spoken word. What's the best course of direction there? Do you keep them on the PECs, or do you start to expand the spoken language? And I know how I feel about it. I mean, I think it kind of has to work in unison a little bit, but I was curious what you guys thought about that. So we know that a lot of kids that we work with are introduced to PECs at very young ages. And we tend to put a little bit more focus on that than we do the actual spoken word. So where do you start to balance it out at?
So I'm Ted, I don't know if you want to talk first. Or
No, you go first. You
Okay.
go first.
So PECs should never be a quiet thing. Like, you should never just be exchanging pictures.
Yeah.
You should be talking and modeling that spoken language. And because what is it? We're doing speaking and non-speaking instead of verbal, non-verbal.
Yes.
Okay. Just had to make sure on that.
You did a really good job right there. I noticed it. I want to reinforce it. You did a good job.
I have it like a note here in my notes to say speaking, non-speaking now. But I wouldn't just say one versus the other. You can use them both in tandem, and if the child has an extensive repertoire of PECs, use those to facilitate verbal communication and start shaping the child's verbal communication.
Spoken. Absolutely.
Sorry.
We all need more than one system, because we do different things under different circumstances. And you really, if the kid's going to be someone who learns how to speak, we got to keep working on that. And it's not like we're going to drop PECs and do that. And there's no research that shows that if you teach PECs or signs, the kid's not going to learn how to speak. That's just nonsense.
Right.
In
that's
fact,
a huge win, actually.
Yeah, and it speeds it up. But, you know, we all have more than one kind of way to do verbal behavior. We can speak. I know like 8 words in sign. We can write. We can type. We can gesture. Like, you know, what Chad is always doing to me is this.
I am not.
So, you know,
there was one time I said, take the microphone away from him, but other than that.
Well, and when my first time I was in China, I forgot to bring cufflinks. I forgot to bring a tie, and I had to do my talk the next day. And so there were a few department stores on the street where my hotel was. So I'm walking on the street. I go to the first department store, and I ask them where their ties are, but I don't know how to say it in Mandarin. So I did this. They had no idea what I was talking about. So I pulled out a receipt from my wallet and my pen, and I drew a picture of a shirt with a necktie, and I pointed it out. And I guess they didn't have them. Then I did this for cufflinks, and he said, and led me over to the case with all the cufflinks, which was weird. They had cufflinks but no ties. So I got my cufflinks there. Then I went to the next department store, and I just pulled out my picture of the tie, and the guy led me right over to the ties, and I got a tie. Well, you know, we all need more than one way that we do verbal behavior, because different circumstances call for different things. And just because you can do one doesn't mean you can't do others. And just because we're really teaching one, going to town on one, doesn't mean we're also not working on that. You know, we don't stop teaching kids we don't stop working on speaking and explaining stuff and spoken vocabulary and spoken expression when we teach writing and reading, right? It's the same.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
No, I think that what Lauren said was kind of hit on something I've observed a lot, that I have seen a lot of PECs when it's done very quietly. And when I've always implemented, and you've been in my classrooms when we've done it together, is we usually try to at least get that echoic response of the kids. So I think that's probably the takeaway for the PECS question is, it should be paired. Best practice is that it is paired with spoken words, even if they're approximations. The point
even
of
if
the
it's just, like,
PECS,
the initial sound.
yeah, the point of the PECS should be to develop the language and the communication, right? So I think at the very least, it should develop some spoken language alongside of it and still support it. But I don't think you should abandon it either. I think the question that was being asked by that speech pathologist was, should I just bail on the PECS and focus on the spoken word? And I think they've got to exist together. So
yeah,
kind of my
especially if
thought
that's
about
the
it.
child's main form of communication right now. You're basically taking the child's voice away until let's not
take children's voices away. That's something from like a Disney movie, right? Like the voice got. Isn't there a movie? Disney movie.
That's not like Ursula. This situation.
Ursula took the voice away. Yeah.
Just to really Disney it.
Yeah. Ursula also said, "Don't forget the body language."
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
Apparently, once you learn the body language, you don't need the voice.
Yeah.
And body languages can be autoclitics, right?
Absolutely.
Maybe? Yes. Points.
When did the autoclitics discussion come up? I remember.
I think it was our first one. Wasn't our? Was it our first?
It should be everyone.
Chat? I can't.
We should talk about autoclicks every single time. Yeah.
One of the first classes that I had in grad school when I started 37 years ago. That's when I started grad school. 37 years ago, 1983. My very first semester I had verbal behavior. And I was a first-year graduate student. It was with a bunch of third and fourth-year grad students. And we're picking what we're talking about. I got autoclitics. And it was actually kind of fun. It was difficult, but, I think I handle it well. No, it's cool. Autoclitics, I think are really undertaught. I think they're misunderstood. I think people make the whole thing harder than it needs to be when they're teaching people what autoclitics are. And essentially, those other things we do, in addition to the manding, correcting, all that, there are those other things we do that change the meaning. They're the subtle nuances, if you will.
It was the social skills. That's what it was. It was last week when we were talking about social skills. Yeah, that does make sense.
So body language is,
But I think about like hand talkers. Like Lauren, you're a hand talker.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
You got things going on
yourself
all the time.
Yeah, you can't stand too close to me. I'll poke someone.
Yeah.
Need space to talk.
You can't answer like that.
Yeah, and one of the things that's hard about like working on the Zoom meeting and kind of collaborating is you have a very specific, like I've always noticed when you want to jump in, you have a specific hand gesture that you make. And it's kind of like reaching forward, like let me talk, and it's hard to see on the Zoom, so it's hard to know where that cue is. But
I feel like things like that are taught in like speaking classes, like in your first year of college, if you have to do a class for public speaking, like autoclitics are in there. They don't tell you what it's called. So.
Okay. Hey, could I bring up a question that came?
Oh, I'd love for you to bring up a question.
Party. Okay.
Yeah.
So,
you can do a watch party.
Silly question from a layperson. Yeah, Greg, it is silly, but I'm going to answer it anyway. We talk to dogs who clearly don't understand a lot of language. You'd be surprised. But somehow we communicate with them. Can language entail information to someone who doesn't use the language? Yes.
Absolutely.
With my dog.
Tone.
Yeah, if you noticed a little while ago, he was doing this. He's manding. And what he's manding is for me to play with him, for me to pet him, for me to do something with him, right? What he does before I pick him up, because I don't just automatically pick him up when I come in here, he sits there and he stands there staring at me going, because that's almost a bark, but not quite a bark. He doesn't even have to bark. He just goes, and I'll pick him up. Because if he doesn't, he starts to bark. But also dogs, that I don't know what they understand from us, but they get tone. They get, if I say TREAT or cheese time, Buddy perked up.
Oh no.
Poor Buddy.
Yeah, he's like, really?
Understand that stuff. Or go outside or go for a walk on a leash. They understand that stuff. And it's cross-species verbal behavior. Isn't that cool? The cats do that. I have one who just, different cats don't meow to other cats. They make other sounds. They meow to people.
Yes, I read that.
Meow to people. How manipulative is that? Yeah, they act cute and meow to us because we pay attention to that.
So cats' tails say a lot of things. So they use body language for their main source of communication. So yeah, it's everything.
Not Manx cats because they don't have tails.
It's true. Yeah, that's a good one.
Wow.
That's a good, I mean.
They don't have
What type of augmentative communication device should we use for cats?
Well, I think whatever they're doing, they've got it. I feel like
Article this November where this woman taught her dog. We all know how I view my dog.
Yes. Yeah.
Child,
to use Big Mac buttons to do basic commands.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's cool.
No audience, this doesn't mean we're comparing your children to dogs and cats.
No, correct.
No. That's just.
All we're saying is that this verbal behavior, all kinds of animals are verbal.
Yeah.
Whales are verbal. Dolphins are verbal. Birds are verbal. Bees are verbal. Their waggle dance tells all sorts of things, like where to find the pollen and how far away and how to get there and all of that stuff. It's all verbal behavior within species and across species.
Yeah. So Lauren, I guess a question for you is, do you have a preference of augmentative communication for students that you work with as completely putting on your speech chat? And I picture your speech chat as being this big brimmed, very nice hat that you might wear to the Kentucky Derby.
Yes.
You're a Southern lady. You have a mint julep.
Oh,
in your hand.
Katie, we should call
Okay,
your
hold on,
mom
there you
and
go.
your aunt and have them as guests and have them weigh in their opinion on this. You can dial them up right now and ask them what their
I
recommended.
think they'd be upset they didn't have notice.
People don't want to do this.
We could do
without
like the
notice.
radio show. You're on
9:30
WX9.
And they also might be working, but it would be cool doing their jobs as speech therapists. But yeah, I have a lot of those in my family.
Yeah.
So my line is I don't have a favorite device. I have least favorite things that I don't like when parents choose, or like families choose, but it's kind of child-led. Like and I think as any speech therapist, if you have a child that has just any type of, I know one that I've used a lot and one that I like a lot is Toby devices. Ted, you have other ones that you mentioned.
Like the Little and Pathfinder?
Pathfinder, that's the one, yes.
Yeah.
So I've used Pathfinder and I think those are very easy to use. They've got a nice interface. But at the same time, you should just be able to navigate where the family is.
Yeah.
Are those dynamic devices you're talking about, or are
Those
they?
are dynamic devices. I think
Okay.
I love using PECs, but I think PECs is something that we should naturally be using. If you're in a classroom with children that are emergent spoken and emergent non-spoken.
You got it.
Or really trained.
Awesome. Yeah.
We're like on 12 years of using nonverbal and verbal. It's a lot of rewiring that's happening. But I think those should be used as well. So I know I had an augmented communication teacher in grad school. She was like, you should never have a favorite. Your favorite should be what is the most successful for this learner.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What I think is important is that the learner can use it. Learner can carry it around if it's a thing that needs to be carried around. It's going to enable the learner to talk to the widest audience in a way that audience can understand, so that the audience can reinforce that behavior. The audience can converse with the person, and it has to be kind of durable. What bothers me about the Proloquo and stuff on iPads is it doesn't really bother me, but you really have to have a great case for the iPad. Because it's going to get dropped. I drop stuff right and left. And I'm a clumsy 60-year-old, not a clumsy 8-year-old. So yeah, it has to
So
be
I have kind of a silly question. How important do you think it is that the voice output, reflect the actual learner's voice? And here's the reason why I ask. First of all, I've seen output devices where a girl was using an output device with a male voice to it. But I also, until I saw The Theory of Everything, had no clue that Stephen Hawkins was British.
Yeah.
So
The 4-year-old girl shouldn't sound like Patrick Stewart, perhaps.
yeah. So
It'd be kind of cool,
that's
but yeah,
something we
not
just
for
kind
her.
of
Yeah, you're right.
skip over that thought process a little bit, I think, you know.
I know one thing that, I mean, I remember, Chad, when we shared an office in the school system, I would often play around with the different voices. And
You
Old
would,
Man
yeah.
Will sounds like this should actually never be used in elementary school.
Right.
No,
But
just more evidence that you didn't have enough to do at work. But
Oh no.
and I joined your company. I've been busy since.
I know what I heard you. Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I think one thing that should be, when you're picking a voice for for like a learner, child, adult, it should try to be as reflective of their age and gender as possible. But a big thing that's often neglected is a hearing test.
Oh,
Because
interesting. Yeah.
maybe a reason that that little girl was using a boy's voice is that boys registered a deeper frequency than, and they have, you can hear, it's not as a high-pitched voice. And so it's important to do a hearing test before you assign a device to a child to see if they're like, that's going to be a barrier.
Well, and why not involve the learner in choosing the voice?
Yes.
Yeah, that makes
That's
sense.
interesting idea.
You
Yeah.
know, anyone who likes Fran Drescher is going to always pick Fran Drescher.
Yeah.
If more
Or
people
Fran.
Wouldn't that be great if
like
I could just
Fran
get a
Drescher-
device voice?
Would it? I don't. It could be a social barrier. I don't know.
I think also, I know a lot of companies, I should say a lot, I listen to a lot of NPR, and there's been a couple different episodes on having siblings of the child make the voice for the child. Like on
Oh,
their
that's
That's a good
smart.
idea,
That's
too.
very cool. Yeah.
Lauren, I feel like you're the most prepared for this conversation. I feel like you
That's why
actually did
she's
like
here.
research and
That's
like
why
you cited
she's
an
here.
article. She's got a notebook. You know,
I have
Ted's got his
visual
dog.
aids.
Also, not at home.
I've got
Ted
sticky notes.
actually is the most prepared with his books. Ted's always the most prepared.
Yeah, I'm kind of jealous of Ted's library. Okay, so another interesting question for me is, what should the criterion be? Like, where do we define success with augmentative communication? And where do we kind of reach a point and say this isn't working?
Well, that's a
Wow.
fun.
Yeah, I mean, but I think it's an important question. I mean, we're all about data. We're BCBAs, and you know, we data.
If
And
we
speech should be about data as well, too. I mean,
Speech is all about data. Like, you've seen my data. It's a lot.
yeah,
you know, if the learner is fluent with it, and if it works in that learner's world, so the learner can talk to other people and they can talk back and everyone understands each other, you know, I think there's your success. It's great when it goes beyond man's. It's great when it goes way beyond man's. Again, I used to do, I had as a client in my mental health practice, a gentleman in his late 30s with cerebral palsy who could speak, but it was very hard to understand. So he used the Pathfinder. And when his was broken in the shop, he pulled out his old Liberator. You know, and we could still have conversations that way. If it works, it's successful. Lauren?
Yeah, I would say, Ted, I'm right there with you. With it works, it's successful. And I think oftentimes in a school system, if we are leaning towards using a device, we need to look at where the child is with the language. Are we developing language? Are we rehabilitating language or habilitating language? So, and we need to take that acquisition period in, because look at how long it takes us to form communication as adults. And now
all right, yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the difference between rehabilitation and habilitation. You know, it's one thing to have to teach verbal behavior from scratch and use of a device or an AAC system at the same time. It's another thing, if I'm 70 years old, I had a stroke, intellectually, I'm like still 90% intact, but I'm not able to use my vocal musculature the same way.
Exactly.
Okay? I still have all of those verbal relations. I still have that history. I just can't do them anymore. So I think I'm probably assuming I can still use my fingers and stuff well. I'm going to get some pretty quick acquisition with the AAC device. Of course, what's going to get in the way of that is me probably being angry and bitter because now I have to use this instead of talk.
Yeah.
That's part of the grieving that comes with that. But it's a different thing with a different trajectory.
Oh, very much
But
so. And even like using an eye gaze system with stroke patients that's hard.
Yeah.
But I think you need to give time when you're working in the school system, because you need to look at, is the family using the device? Is the child being shown the device? We discussed that on Tuesday, where if the kid's device is in their backpack, why are we even trying this for the most part? But we need to, sorry, I'm gotten clearly way off topic.
Well, that's what we do here. It's one of our hashtags, off topic.
Yeah, it's true.
But no, I think it needs to be a longer acquisition process than what we're giving it right now. Because oftentimes you see it gets written in IEP for like year 1, and by year 2, like, well, it's just not really a success. And it's like, well, what percentage? Like, if you were to take a percentage of that year, talking with my hands, hitting things, what percentage of that year was that child actually using the device and demonstrating and being taught on that device?
And Ted brought up a good point about the stroke victim, I think, because you look back on that previous knowledge, right? That learning you can bring forward into it. And when we look at a lot of our learners with autism that come into self-contained settings and special education, and this kind of cycles back around to the conversation about BB Tuesday, that if you're working with a child that has the developmental milestones of an 18-month-old, even if they're 5-6 years old, but their verbal behavior milestones are showing at like 18 months, would you give an 18-month-old a dynamic communication device and try to have them learn on that? That's kind of where I run into the barrier. I know the very first classroom that you and I worked in, the great iPad purge of 2015, every single learner in my classroom had in their IEP a augmentative communication device. And they were all like ability-wise and developmental-wise spread out as far as what they could do, but they could all speak. And they were all labeled nonverbal, and but they could all speak. So
can I clear the air here for a moment?
Yeah, let's clear the air. Yeah.
I did not write those IEPs, nor did I.
Oh no, I know.
We worked together, but we were both new.
Yeah, we just purged it. Yeah, it was great. But
a lot of 18-month-olds, though, typically developing 18-month-olds, know how to use this device.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
But again, that's a little bit different. But and a lot of kids with disabilities know how to use this device too. Problem with this device.
But does that interrupt? This is a good question for you though. Does that interrupt the motivation or the development of interaction, kind of interpersonally and face to face? I
don't know about that, but my own experience has been, and I don't have data, all I have is my own experience. If this or the iPad have been all about fun, watching YouTube videos and playing games, and now I want to use it to teach verbal behavior, it's awfully difficult because, the motivation is to do one thing that's simple and fun with rapid, frequent reinforcement. And I'm trying to use that same device that evokes all of that behavior and is a source of all of that reinforcement to teach something else, which down the road is going to be simple and fun and produce a lot of reinforcement, but early on is going to be more effortful and produce some errors. So,
so what I've seen
I say get a different looking one and make it as different as possible.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to talk about. Like when I go into classrooms, a lot of the times there's an iPad with the indestructible case that's like blue, that's for fun, and there might be like a red one or a green one that is just used as their augmentative communication device. So as a teacher, if you get a student who has an iPad to communicate and it's already in like a blue case, you might want, if you're using iPads in other ways, make sure it looks different, like that said. And that's typically, I would think that would help. I'm sure it's not a fix-all, and if you've been using it for fun for so long and all of a sudden it's used to communicate or to work, but yeah.
Yeah, I know that's something that you did really well in your classroom when you had children that had at least written in a device. I know we would get some that was like, the child's talking, they really don't need it.
Yes.
But you had a different color for your iPad. I'm a believer of if you are trying to teach a child to communicate on a device like an iPad, the iPads should then be removed from the child's environment. Like,
Right.
Yeah.
because then they can access reinforcement in other ways. But I just think that's something that needs to be quickly faded out if that's the route you're going on.
And in the classroom, that's easier to do, but you can't control home. And that's the hardest part, because there could be 3 iPads at home that all have the same case, and we don't know. But that's where communicating with parents could help. But
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like best practice, you know, if you are going to do some type of augmented communication, whether it's dynamic or not, some type of survey of what the parents use in the house for electronics, because that definitely can interfere with the instruction. I mean, I've had, and Lauren, you and I've seen this for sure, where a kid because they couldn't get on YouTube and they had to use that thing to talk or to communicate, the iPad ended up being slung across the room. So
kids are smart, and they can like bypass blocks to sites and settings. That's incredible.
Best friend with those. Yeah. But at the same time, I've seen kids that have like IT degrees get through that.
That's crazy.
So going back to the idea of criterion, though, because one of the things that I'm always really hard on occupational therapists about, if they're putting in some type of assistive technology or any type of like sensory thing that they're putting in, there should be a measured outcome. There should be something demonstrating that this intervention is having the impact, the result that we want. And my question is, I'm sure that's a moving target for every student that we work with, but if the outcome is for that student to have a vocabulary of 10 words, is the dynamic device really the best device for him to use, or would just simply staying with PECs be the best? I mean, to me, the benefit of the dynamic over like PECs is that you can program so much more into it, so that you can have such a more variety of vocabulary and detail to the communication. And that kind of cycles around, you know, Ted kind of threw it back at me a little bit with the cognition level and just kind of intellectual ability of the student. But I do think it's relative. I mean, relevant.
We're getting there.
Yes.
I'm getting there. It's like
we're trying.
That was a little autocratic.
Yeah. So, because I've worked with a student that was clearly, truly a non-verbal student, non-spoken, didn't make all the sounds that he made had no meaning. They were just truly sounds. I think you know who I'm talking about, Lauren.
Yep, I know exactly who we're talking about.
And we had a window of, you know, and what we kind of demonstrated over the course of the year, we were able to program about, I think we had gotten up to about 17 to 20 words and sign.
Yeah, we had really made a ton of progress with him.
Yeah, and that was a heavy
sign.
Yeah, it was adapted sign based on his motor ability for sure. I mean, he had his own kind of dialect with his sign language for sure. But and then whenever he moved on to the middle school, they shifted to PECs, and we abandoned this thing that we were progressing in. We were showing progress with it, and then just really starting from scratch. So that's why I really think no matter what we're talking about within the special education setting, that there always has to be that defined criteria that's showing success and showing progress, so we stay on a continuum with it. And if it's not, then we change, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know what that defined criterion is, though. Like it's definitely going to be different for every student, I think.
Yeah, I would love to say like, okay, this is step 1, 2, and 3, but I think then we step away from individualized education plans.
Right.
And I know for like that one particular student, we, up until when we started using sign, when we had tried dynamic devices, static devices, PECs, that did not have any meaning to him. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes he'd rip the PECs, or he threw a couple different devices. But it's just like that didn't mean anything to him until we were able to pair the sign language, because he was able to use it and it was functional. And
yeah.
I think functionality needs to be part of that final criteria. Is it functional for the child?
And actually, this is a great, like, controversial question. I've always meant to ask Ted this, and I never have. So Ted.
Yes.
Lauren and I had done this whole procedure with this kid, and we were trying to get VB map data, which is difficult if a kid doesn't have any spoken language. But we got him to where we felt like we were getting tax with sign. So if if you hold up a picture of a dog and the child immediately signs dog, would you classify that as a tax?
Well, if also I hold up a picture of something that isn't a dog and the kid does something that isn't that sign for dog, yeah, I probably would.
But not the same field,
I want
right?
to be sure that I have that conditional discrimination. That
Yeah.
when there's a dog, he signs dog, but when it's something else, he doesn't. Otherwise, what he's tacting is you're holding a card.
Yeah, and we
Right.
did. We had him. I think we had up to like 10 of those, right? Where he would.
Yeah, we did. And then we threw in a couple just like red herons for him.
Yeah. But
Red herrings.
The topography, the modality doesn't determine whether or not it's attacked.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all can tact
Yeah.
by speech. We can tact by sign if we know the sign. We can tact in different languages. You guys can tact more in Bulgarian than I can. I can tact in German. We can write our responses when we're tacting. We can tact by pointing. We can select from a number of things to point out what it is. There are a bunch of different ways that we can do it. So it's not the modality that makes it a tact. It's the relationship between the functional relation between the movement and the thing being tacted.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where we were. It was a cool little trial. I mean, I think we hit a ceiling with it. But we were working on it for a couple months, and it was a pretty cool little trial. And I think it just speaks to when we start talking about supplementing communication in different modalities of communication, and being a good teacher, creativity and being willing to kind of think outside the box with it is really an important part of what we do. And I like what Lauren said about when we're talking about preferences of devices, letting it be child guided and not necessarily teacher guided or parent guided, that it really is about that individual, which is something we always cycle around back to with ABA, any conversations that we have. So
yeah. And Chad, to kind of round out that story with the student, I saw the student this past spring, and I did a couple of the signs and he picked it right back up. I was so excited.
Wait, why did he need to pick it right back up? Were people not signing with him? Is this the kid who they went to middle school and they switched him over to PECs?
Yeah.
They may as well switch him over to French. What's the point?
Well, as a student, it would be really frustrating if all of these adults were teaching you and reinforcing you using this one thing, and then all of a sudden you're not using that anymore. You have to use this other thing to communicate, and that's where that functionality comes in. It's like, is it even ethical to do that?
How's that decision made? How does it benefit the child? At least with sign, I don't know about you guys, but I carry my hands and fingers with me everywhere.
Jazzy.
I leave
Always.
Look at the beach and don't notice until I get home. I guess I have nothing to say until I get back to the beach to pick it up.
Right.
Well, and with this one particular child, I think this is also an important point, is the parents themselves, when Chad and I had talked to them, they were not on board with using any dynamic device or static device. And so they agreed to use sign at home. And that was successful, because even the mom was like, he's signing drink, or he's doing this. What does this mean? It's like, oh my gosh, he's generalizing across.
Awesome.
And that was so funny, because I remember us working on it right before Christmas break, and we had put a little bit of time into it. This is our first year working together, and we came back from Christmas break, and the mom was like, he was doing all these things with his hands, and I had forgotten to communicate to the parent what we were working on. So he was doing all these signs for eat, more, drink, and it was a teacher fail on my part. I had not expressed that to the parents and say, hey, let's develop this and keep working on it in the home. So he was manning for stuff in really appropriate ways and getting pretty frustrated as parents, but we got it all worked out.
That's great.
But I think it speaks to collaboration too. And we talk about, the very first week we talked about ABA coming into the schools and kind of the established order of things, and how important it is to collaborate. And where that hiccup came in with that student was the receiving speech pathologist was not willing to use sign. She didn't feel comfortable using signs. She said she didn't know signs, so she was going to switch them to text. And that does a disservice to the child. There needs to be greater collaboration. Just like I failed with collaborating with the parent on that situation. When I started working on something in the classroom that was as important and needed to be generalized as the communication, I should have communicated that and collaborated with the parent. And honestly, I should have collaborated with the parent to ask them what their priorities were for him to learn first in the home. So that was kind of a fail on my part. Yeah.
From an IEP perspective, though, that is kind of a violation of federal law. You know, we're not going to teach you what you need.
We discussed it.
What we have. That's exactly what that is. We, you know, like, oh well, the math teacher's not so good at math, so we're gonna draw pictures of animals. You know, it's you know, it is a violation of federal law. So sue them.
It really is.
And it's against the ethical board of speech therapy. Like we are bound to do what's best for the child to communicate.
Yeah. Well, and it's against our ethical code too, the professional compliance code for behavior analysts. Of course, the teacher wasn't one of those, but it should be. I wouldn't be surprised if it's against, you know, the teachers or school's ethical code if they have one, because, you know, there you have someone who's doing something and they're getting pretty good at it and it's serving them well. And we're going to take it away and give you what we have because it's what we have.
And unfortunately, it happens a lot. And you know, IDEA spells it out. And I know that Kate, one of the things that Kate wanted to do on one of these chats was kind of topic out some IDEA issues and IEPs and looking at that behavioral, you know, how goals are written and things like that. I think that'd be a fun conversation to have. I think between all of us, our experiences, we've seen a lot. Cooper's probably seen the most. Every once in a while, Ted, I just want you to take Cooper's pulse, though. He just like
so cute.
I think he's still
looking outside until someone walks by, then he'll bark again.
Yeah, and I've been having this. Here we go. Hashtag off topic, but you know how they say like people's pets, or they start to look like their pets, or people's pets look like them. Sometimes the angle that Cooper's sitting, his face and Ted's face look kind of very, you know, that very professory kind of full of knowledge.
Professor Cooper, yes.
Professor Cooper, I like it. Yeah.
He's getting a haircut.
I think
on Tuesday. Haircut on Tuesday.
He's getting a haircut on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Does he have to wear a face mask when he gets it?
He doesn't.
Oh, well, that's good.
And he's getting.
I can't get anybody to trim my beard because you got to wear a face mask when you go in.
You and Piper kind of max with the crazy.
Yeah. So, but I forgot what we were talking about. We were talking about like IDEA. Sticking with IDEA and
using sign.
But you know, we had, again, I think Lauren, you and I had done our burden of demonstrating. We had the data, we had it recorded, we had it to show. But I think it speaks to just encouraging parents to advocate for their kids and you know what works the best for them. I don't think that, well, I know that what works for one family doesn't always work for another family, right? I mean, we know that for sure, certain. I am curious, in your experience, where does the demand for augmentative communication usually start in the IEP? Is it with the parents, or is it with the speech pathologist, or is it with the teacher?
Cool. That's a loaded one.
I'm throwing some tough ones at you today.
Yeah, you know, I'm on vacation. Shouldn't I get a easy
I feel like it's one of those political talk shows, you know?
Yeah. No, I would, this is a kind of a left field one. I feel like it's the teachers that often push for advice, and which is interesting because oftentimes they're the ones that don't want to use them. But I feel like so often when I meet with like a preschool teacher or a kindergarten teacher, like, well, they need advice. And it's like, well, they're
So maybe it's a lack of training thing into getting more spoken, if it's possible, more spoken or sign language out of the
but student. I would say a lot of times parents push for advice. I've actually had a parent hand me a prescription pad with iPad written on it.
I remember that.
Wow.
That was so strange.
Wow.
Yeah. Their pediatrician had done it, right?
Not even tablet. iPad.
iPad, yeah.
Okay.
And, I didn't know what to do. But then like later the parent mentioned, she's like, oh yeah, and the home iPad. And I just didn't understand, like, why did I get this prescription note then? But oftentimes I feel like if it's a contentious case, we see more of the parents asking for a device.
Well, I think
that,
education environments are very thing oriented anyway,
yes.
like
Oh yeah.
pokey stools and iPads, and we focus a lot on things that we can introduce, because when you put something in somebody's hands, it seems to be a quick fix.
Yeah, it
right?
feels like
But
a
it's like Ted
solution.
said,
Like, oh, this
yeah,
is what I can
Well,
use.
there's the
Yeah.
appearance that something has been done and accomplished.
yeah,
Yes.
And
very
it
much.
is a lot quicker than actually teaching. What drives me nuts is when kids who have really messy handwriting, you know, instead of working on penmanship, instead of working on the fine motor control with their hands, they're given those weird green plastic keyboard things with a screen about this big. I don't know what they are, but they have them in a couple school divisions up here. I'm thinking, what the hell? And the kid never uses them, but the school has fulfilled their obligation at that point.
Right.
yeah.
And I think these kids need more writing and drawing and doing mazes and all sorts of things, and not less. And instead what they're given is less.
Yeah, and I think you see that with a lot of the, just kind of shift on next week's topic a little bit, but a lot of the sensory equipment that emerges in the schools in these sensory rooms, because back in the 90s when the sensory integration stuff started poking its head around, and parents were kind of demanding it, it was a simple fix for the schools to do. They just created a room, threw all the sensory equipment into it, and said, okay, we've solved the problem. But that's not solving the problem, right? It's just throwing something at it, and while it may appear to be a band-aid, it doesn't actually enact any change or affect any change, and especially in the individual students. So what they ended up being was an outlet for the teachers more so than what the kids were getting out of it, I think. And a lot of application we've seen it kind of take root in. But no, I find that to be true too, like kindergarten, especially with just even requests for speech services. You see that really pushed from the kindergarten teachers, it seems like. Everybody wants a speech eval done, but you, like, speech pathologists screen at the kindergarten level.
In Virginia, I don't know where, I'm not speaking to other states, but in Virginia, all kindergartners go through a screening process. And so first teachers screened, and then any children that are flagged get speech therapy screened. And then if they are eligible, then we push through to eligibility. But yeah, I have a lot of teachers that come in and they say like, hey, this this child just isn't talking. And then it's like, we need a device. It's like, well, let's not put the cart in front of the horse today. Maybe tomorrow, but not today. So.
Well, I think we're especially for kids that aren't talking, we're really hypersensitive to that now, with the prevalence of autism and stuff, that whenever a 2-3-year-old just isn't very wordy, we tend to dismiss other possibilities and causations of that and jump right to a level of concern. My middle child, who you all know, is, anything but not wordy, but for the longest time, I thought he was deaf or didn't talk, but I just realized that my older son was doing all the talking for him. He had no reason to talk, right?
There's a lot of data that proves that second children usually talk later due to older siblings talking for them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I know that's what happened. I mean, my sister still talks for me. So,
So Lauren, I wanted
Mine
to leave just a
doesn't.
little bit of time, not too much time, because I don't want us to get too much trouble with this, and just talk about core boards for a little bit.
my nemesis.
Yay! Here we go.
Are you familiar with core boards?
Am I?
Yeah.
I think I have an idea what they are, but why don't we let Lauren start? And I must confess, I already don't like them.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good.
Okay.
Yeah. So core boards, for anyone that doesn't have a great understanding of them, so it's what your core vocabulary is. So you start with pronouns, action words, familiar verbs, and move from there. And it's high frequency words that the children are learning. I am not a huge fan of them for many reasons. I feel like they teach very vague language, and I I don't feel like it teaches the child to actually communicate. It teaches peripheral communication, but not direct communication. Like I can say, you go, but until we know who I'm talking to and where I want them to go, nothing will get done.
Right.
Right.
And
Okay, may I jump in?
Yes, please do, Tim.
Okay, that's exactly what I thought they were. So it's interesting that what the child has to say is being selected for the child.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that so much of it is non-functional, because if I'm using one of these core boards, I can't ask for what I want. I can't tell you to stop that. There are a lot of things that I can't do that would serve me immediately.
Right.
But what I can do is use pronouns. What, you know.
But a lot of our children, like when they're teaching core boards, it is not age appropriate to teach pronouns.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it's age appropriate for most people to teach pronouns. But there's the whole individualized educational program thing, the whole IEP thing with that word individual in it. And for this one, we're not there yet.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't know. I think it's kind of I hope it's yet another fad and it goes away.
It's
yeah,
been around for a while, hasn't it? I mean,
it has. I know I'm like
it seems like
burning
it's come back a little bit.
It's
Yeah.
when I was in school, it was somewhat coming up, and then I feel like in the past like 2 years, it's really just hit a resurgence.
Yeah.
And I worked with one speech therapist. She's like, that's the only form of language acquisition that I teach my children, like even spoken children. And internally, I'm screaming. I do not think, and there is some science that says that if you teach these high frequency words, it teaches more acquisition quicker. Like a child can acquire language quicker, but it's not functional. It's not specific. And you're going to see behaviors if you don't have such a specific language.
Yeah, what's in it for the child? You know, the is a high frequency word. Now, I can either teach you to say Diet Coke when you're thirsty, because Diet Coke, the beverage of EBCS, all the
Yes.
you know, Diet Coke is delicious and refreshing. And if I'm thirsty, this is valuable to me now. You can either teach me this, which pays off for me immediately because I say it and you give it to me, or you can teach me to say the.
Right.
What do I get for the? There's no point in it. There's no point in, now, the Diet Coke down the road, that's autoclitic, because that means a specific Diet Coke.
Yeah.
Or it means just one, not a bunch. But that comes down the road when it's useful. You know, if it's just, again, that's so much in education, unfortunately, is developed around the notion of the average student.
Yeah.
Student. But there is no average student.
We're proponents of, don't get us wrong, if you're watching, we're proponents of expanding language, but doing it in a responsible and procedural kind of way, right? When you're teaching a child first command, you want immediacy in the reinforcement. So if you're working on trying to get the child to say cookie, and instead of hitting you for the cookie, you're going to reinforce the cookie and not immediately expect them to say, may I please have the cookie? You know, like, we're going to do it in a procedural kind of fashion, and data is going to drive all that. My big hesitation with core boards, and I encourage everybody to always go to the journals. I mean, there's so much literature out there, and jump beyond just your specialty journal. So whenever I get on a like sensory integration type rant or anything like that, I will read journals from occupational therapy, academics, and also special education, as along with the behavioral component of it. And it's an important part of what we do, and should be an important part of what we do. So I encourage that. But my big hiccup with the core boards, with the iPads, with everything, is what I said earlier about, I just feel like it interrupts one of the biggest components of communication, which is the interpersonal relationship. And when you interrupt that with a median of a core board and direct the child away from you, I mean, think about how often we're trying to get that social skill of looking in the direction that you're talking or something like that, and then direct them to a piece of paper or a board or an iPad you've interrupted the fluency of that interpersonal interaction. And that could just be me. That could just be an opinion
Well, I think
that I hold. But
I would think that there's a line with that, because if the iPad is their main form of communication, that's how they're
Mhm.
that is an interpersonal skill for them. So I think it just depends on what the abilities are, and if we're not properly supporting other skills.
Yeah.
Hey, Ted, could I plug another book here?
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely, Ted. We love your
Actually,
book
I love your
clubs.
books.
Eventually, I'm
Find
certain
them
that
by
we're going
the
to
end of-
start getting some,
Some royalties? I hope so.
yeah, royalties from all this stuff.
You mentioned sensory integration. There are a lot of fads that come and go. This is a great book, Controversial Therapies for Autism and Intellectual Disabilities. This is the second edition. It's by Richard Fox and Jim Muehlek. It's a great book. It walks through what's science, what's pseudoscience, why empirically validated treatments are important, the appeal of unscientific treatments. And then it just walks through like one therapy at a time. You know, the evidence for or lack thereof, the evidence against, where it came from, and so on. And in here,
I'd buy that
we
book.
have fads
Yeah.
in special education, neutralization of special education. Ooh, Lauren, fads and controversial therapies or treatments in speech and language pathology.
Oh, beautiful.
Wow.
I
Yeah.
need to.
Sensory
We should
integration.
have a book club
auditory
about this.
integration,
This is
We should
facilitated
have one in the office. Yeah.
positive behavior support, non-aversive treatment, gentle teaching, pet me, sniff me, squeeze me, quack treatment for autism, relationship-based therapies, old horses and new stables. My friend Jim Todd wrote that chapter. Rapid prompting, facilitated communication, science, ethics, and the history of magic, and so on.
Hold on.
Casein-free diet. So
Uh,
that's the book, controversial therapies for autism and intellectual disabilities by Richard Fox and James Muehlek, M-U-L-I-C-K.
Ted. Do you know these guys?
I do know them, yeah. And also,
You
the first edition was by Steve Schroeder, Richard Fox, and Jim Muehlek, but Steve died. So it's just for the second edition.
You should reach out to them and see if we can't get them on one day. That would be so much fun.
Oh, well,
That would be amazing.
I'll ask them, or I'll ask Jim Todd, or I'll ask Kim Schreck. Actually, I was thinking about that yesterday. Any of them would be perfect.
That'd be
me know.
awesome. Yeah.
Give me a few dates, and I'll talk with. I'll try Jim Todd and Kim Schreck and see if they'll join us.
Yes.
That would be incredible. Yeah, I think that would be a lot of fun for everybody. We would.
Yeah.
Hold on, but Ted, you touched something that I realized that we have not really discussed, or maybe we discussed it early on Tuesday.
Was
Maybe I
it
just
Diet
forgot.
Coke?
No,
Of-
I thought it was maybe Coke Zero, all the flavor, none of the calories.
well, this was
That was a different commercial.
Right.
We got to do one on Tuesday. One
that
on
was
Thursday.
for the Bulgarian audience.
But facilitated communication.
Yes.
I feel like so often with augmented communication systems, you see facilitated communication.
Oh, absolutely. And
And-
it's not called facilitated communication anymore because people know what a fraud it is and how it's ruined families and sent innocent people to jail and ruined careers and ruined lives. No, it's not called that anymore. It's called assisted typing, or it's called AAC, but it's not.
And
It's
that,
not good AAC. It's called that. You know, it's just when it's proven to be a fraud, you just change the name. And there are proponents of it. And some universities actually have used it as a what's the word? An accommodation.
Really?
Students, isn't this crazy? That happened at the university where I teach once, George Mason University, in 2005. A student graduated with his bachelor's degree in history and psychology. And his accommodation was facilitated communication.
well, then he never got a test question wrong. Someone else put him in.
Well, but
Oh,
there's
yeah.
no evidence this guy can read. There's no evidence he could do a lot of things, but he graduated. When I learned about that, I've been with Mason first part-time since 2000 and then full-time since 2009. When I learned about it, about 2010 or 11, I talked with my department chair. I talked with the Office of Disability Services. Apparently that office has rapid turnover. But that person said, no, we will not do this. This is not an accommodation. There's no research to support it. There's a lot of research pointing out what a fraud it is. Absolutely not. This guy used to have his own website. He doesn't have his own website anymore. I don't know what's going on with him, but his facilitator did really well, I guess. His facilitator learned a lot to get those degrees.
And for anyone listening that does not know what facilitated communication is, it's guiding someone to type or write or press a button, and it's within.
Well, it's more than guiding. It's leading their finger there. There's facilitated communication. If I drop your finger on the key on the keyboard, it's rapid prompting if I move the keyboard and put the key under your finger. So
which would be a whole other conversation.
Facilitated communication. Move the keyboard, rapid prompting. Only difference between the two. The only difference.
It's basically
and if you want to know more about either of them, go to quackwatch.com. Seriously, www.quackwatch.com. Real website, great website.
Our sponsorship for today.
Or autismwatch.org. www. You can tell I'm old. I say www. autism-watch.org.
Right, got that. That's a lot of
words.
words.
A whole lot of things there. Great websites. And I wouldn't be surprised if one of them has core language right now.
Yeah,
And
I would actually really appreciate it if they did, because that would make my life a lot easier.
Yeah.
So I think that's a great place kind of to a note to end on, that our role, whether we're approaching it from a behavior analyst perspective or a speech pathologist or special education teacher, is to teach communication. And teaching implies that there's learning going on, and not, I think that word facilitate is such a kind of a great way to kind of put it. We see so much over prompting, so much kind of doing for kids, especially in the self-contained environments in special education, especially in the autism world, that the learning actually isn't taking place. And the reason why I think you got a lot of mistrust that gets developed between parents and schools and IEP teams and things like that is because you're not demonstrating results after years and years of working on something, whether you're shifting from one type of modality, whether it's sign to PECS after demonstrating success with PECS, or just over prompting a student and they never actually generalize it, or not pushing past the very basics of like manding with things. But our role is to teach, and for those children to be able to take it and use it and make themselves the most independent communicator that they can be. That's how they're gonna find success. I mean, it's just a quality of life thing, right? I mean, we want everybody to be able to express themselves. And I really, one of the things that, and I've never really thought about it as that much, but what Ted's hit on a couple times on Tuesday and today, is that there's a lot more thinking going on than maybe what is able to be expressed. And we shouldn't repress that by only giving, deciding what the child's going to say. So that's my soapbox sound off speech. But this was a fun one.
This was.
I feel like I caught Lauren off guard a couple times, which was cool.
She had perfect answers as always. So.
I know.
Yeah. It's informative. I've learned a lot. Yeah.
So next week we're going to have an occupational therapist on. We're going to talk about, Ted, I know one of your favorite topics, which is what role does sensory really have with behavior? It often is
big important.
What's that?
A big important role.
It's often brought into a lot of discussions in special education and tries to explain behavior. We're going to try to break it down and look at how we can collaborate with occupational therapy and also address needs that all individuals have. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye and let everybody else do the same.
Bye.
Everybody.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Love you.
Bye.
All right. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye-bye.